Um, Hello everybody again. As you can probably tell, dusk is falling here in the UK. It is 7 p.m. But for our North American colleagues, it's the middle of the day. And I'm delighted to say that we're joined by a collection of faculty colleagues from our GALA partner, SUNY Geneseo, up in Geneseo in upstate New York. I'm going to just paste in the full list here of all the speakers that we'll be hearing from, with the exception of Beth McCoy, who is sending her apologies. I'm going to hand over to Joe Cope, who is Professor of History at Geneseo, but also the Associate Provost for Academic Success and our primary GALA contact at SUNY Geneseo. So Joe, over to you. The floor is yours and your colleagues.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks to GALA for allowing us to present today. As I said, when people were drifting into the room, we have about a half an hour presentation to talk about our efforts on curricular reform. For those of you who've been around GALA for a while, you may remember that Geneseo presented on our efforts to reform the college curriculum at the summer 2018 GALA conference at Concordia. And so this is in part intended to close the loop and talk about our journey as we wrapped up that process at the end of the last academic year. And so what we'll be presenting on is the process that we took to revise our curriculum and the ways that internationalization, global inquiry, and sustainability help define our new curricular model. So I'll be doing a very quick introduction and then handing things off to my colleagues who will talk about various different pieces of this, this effort. So and Paul, you can advance the slide, please. In 2015, the college adopted institutional learning outcomes called the Geneseo Learning Outcomes for Baccalaureate Education, or shorthanded for GLOBE. This is a skills-based curricular model that embraces 8 core skills that we see as essential to liberal learning and responsible engagement, really, with the world of the 21st century. Our vision for GLOBE is that the undergraduate experience consistently refers back to these skills in an intentional way across the curriculum. So in 2016, our Curricular Design Working Group, or CDWG, we sometimes call it SIDWIG on campus, and so you may hear both in the presentation today. CDWG was the body tasked with translating these skills into an actual curriculum, which was no small task. As we go through the presentation, you'll see that we took a somewhat circuitous path to completing this work. And full disclosure, the original charge to CDWG asked for that project to be done in 1 year. We are now 4 years later and are finally wrapping it up. So it took quite a bit longer than I think anyone anticipated. Obviously, the last 4 years have seen huge disruptions to the landscape of higher education, and getting across the finish line required really heroic efforts from the entire campus community in the midst of the pandemic. And so we did steer through the final piece of this through governance last year, while most of the campus was remote. The curriculum reform process that we underwent posed some complex challenges for us. On the one hand, our campus is deeply invested in its identity as a public liberal arts institution. And so that means foregrounding interdisciplinary inquiry, integrative and applied learning, especially community-based and research-intensive experiences, as well as global learning. That has been one of Geneseo's commitments as exemplified in our membership in GALA. On the other hand, we are also part of a SUNY system of 64 different campuses, which range from R1 research institutions to undergraduate comprehensive colleges, community colleges, technical schools, and just about everything in between. SUNY has general education requirements, or GER, which stipulate a common approach to the core curriculum. What that means is that because it's an attempt to create a general education that applies to 64 very, very different campuses, often SUNY general education becomes a kind of check off the box approach that is very different from the curriculum that we envision based on skills and competencies in GLOBE. So that presented a challenge for us. How do we remain distinctive? How do we live into our commitments as a public liberal arts institution while also speaking to our SUNY overlords? Complicating things further, in parallel with our local processes, SUNY was slowly moving towards a reform of its approach to GER, or general education requirements, which meant in practice that our work on GLOBE was constantly running up against the perfectly reasonable assertion from members of our campus that perhaps we should pause until we could figure out what our system wanted. We ultimately resisted that and forged ahead. Fortunately, as SUNY's GER proposal materialized over the last year, we found that we were actually successfully anticipating much of what they wanted to see, and we're very well set for that. But I offer this just as a way of noting the obstacles and challenges that we faced. Obviously, the last several years have been especially complicated for higher education. As an institution located in the Northeast United States, we are also under significant pressure to adjust to the demographic reality that the population of traditional college-age students is really dropping off. So a lot of conversations on our campus about keeping enrollments up, while at the same time really trying to maintain our commitments to public liberal learning. And I think as we moved through this process, although it did take longer than what we had hoped, I think we're all really happy with the direction that we took. And so to begin kind of fleshing out the details for you, I'm going to hand things over to Melanie Blood, our Associate Provost for Assessment and Curriculum, who will outline some of the key things that we do in our new curricular model. So Melanie. Melanie, you're muted.
Sorry, trying to be polite there, and it always comes back to bite you. As Joe pointed out, our GLOBE recommends a skills-based curriculum that also includes both deep learning in what we would have traditionally looked at as a major, and we maintain that, and breadth of learning. In our breadth of learning, we wanted to de-emphasize the discipline-based knowledge areas that were typical in the past of our SUNY general education and of our own local iteration of the SUNY general education, and focus instead on skills as suggested by GLOBE. In the intervening years, we did revision some of those skills. So for example, sustainability is something that was really not a part of the skills initially outlined when we were first creating GLOBE. So as we looked at to create our general education, some of our requirements remained in that more knowledge base area, including, for example, a continuing commitment to languages other than English, which I think is relevant to this population of GALA. But our most innovative work, I think, comes in this second area of our general education, which we called participation in a global society. And we framed these in terms of 5 skill areas that students should have. And we're happy to discover that while we're in the midst of the SUNY GER change, they're also reframing from knowledge areas to something they're calling competencies, which were not a particular focus in the past. So, and that our focus on skill areas aligns very well with the SUNY's thinking of competencies. So we outlined 5. The first, diversity, pluralism, and power, was one that was really reinforced in the last year as we looked at becoming an anti-racist campus, as we looked at SUNY redefining US history away from being its own standalone requirement and something that instead privileges diversity. The second one, we ended up with 2 that focus on participation in a global culture. The first, world cultures and values. We're thinking of very much an understanding of either a depth of tradition or a broad contrast of traditions that come outside of Western Europe and the United States in its history, although we had a lot of rich conversation about the value of comparative skills, the skill of comparing Western tradition with other world traditions. And we divided that out from contemporary global challenges in which we are thinking perhaps very often from a social science-based social science basis of knowledge to look at how various parts of the world have approached contemporary 21st century challenges. Third, I'm going to move a little more quickly through this. Creativity and innovation is something that evolved from initially a more discipline-based thinking of the arts to think about the very creative ways in which we solve problems using any set of disciplinary skills, and the importance at our institution of introducing students to research and applying their own creativity and the skills that they've acquired to new problems, finding new solutions in and out of the classroom. And then finally, we added sustainability, where we had recently been doing work to also create a sustainability major that's is interdisciplinary in a more radical way than most of our interdisciplinary programs. It really draws across all areas of our curriculum. So we were looking at the 3 pillars of sustainability as all being skills that could be acquired as a part of this newly envisioned general education requirement. So in thinking of these 5 areas, we were very much inspired by the work of the recent interdisciplinary programs that had been either created or revised, including that sustainability studies I just mentioned, but also a socio-medical sciences program that was recently created, and the revisionings that have happened to more traditional fields like English and history, and a revitalization of our identity-based programs, things like Black studies and women's and gender studies. And in all of those cases, we're looking to define the outcomes of the curriculum in a more skills-based way than had been done in the past. Okay, I am going to pass it on now. I believe it's Paul who I pass it on to next. Am I right, or do I?
I think it's Meg next.
Joe, you want to help me out? Is it Meg next?
Meg
Yes, integrative and applied learning.
Hi, everybody. My name is Meg Reitz. I am the sole member of this group that is not a faculty member. So my full-time position is as an associate director in residence life, and I oversee a lot of the co-curricular experiences that are happening outside of the classroom. Our area has looked a lot at providing really structured learning opportunities for students out in the co-curriculum, and spending more and more time thinking about how do we structure that so they're understanding that learning is also happening in those environments too. And so I was asked to co-chair a subcommittee that was looking into the part of our globe that dived into integrative and applied learning. This may seem might be unique or distinctive sort of thing to add as a graduation requirement, but it comes from a really long history at Geneseo of a value and commitment to outside of the classroom experiences and career preparation activities for undergraduate students. And so this is something that has been built upon for a long time, which you'll see. And I think it's one of the things to really point to is that this isn't coming out of the blue. It's not something that we're shouldering a big burden by taking this on. It's really a part of who this campus was before we kind of entered this structuring time. So our subcommittee was tasked with defining integrative and applied learning. What does that mean for our campus? Developing a rubric to evaluate the opportunities that exist so we would know what counted and what didn't. And then also providing some requirements and recommendations for how this gets put into practice. And so what's on this slide right here is actually the definition. So this is what we decided what counts. And this actually came from our state system. So SUNY began a campaign, I want to say about 10 years ago, to really provide job and career experience as part of the SUNY-wide undergraduate experience. And so on all 64 campuses that Joe mentioned, they really were diving into this applied learning thing. During the kind of initial phases of SUNY's work, and then also as part of our subcommittee work, we really pushed the definition to include experiences that were occurring outside of the curriculum. And so not credit-bearing opportunities in all cases, which is why you'll see that this definition from SUNY, and also why we chose to adopt it as kind of to structure our definition on our campus, is that it is broad and it really speaks to a lot of different experience that students might be having. So as long as the experience, whether they're credit bearing or not, whether the college is sponsoring the activity or not, as long as the experience is meeting these criteria, things like being a student athlete, being in student government, working as a resident assistant in residence life, your work outside of college or in college, if possible work studies, internships and practica are all things that would fit under this definition. And so from these definitions here, we developed a kind of a simple checklist. As one of the things we were asked to do was like, would it count? Do you have a syllabus or a learning contract that guides this? That's the structured part. Does it include a hands-on or real world element? Is it including a foundational educational learning opportunity that's connected to learning outcomes? Does it include inexperienced mechanisms for feedback and course correction? So the students are engaged in the process throughout it. Is it connected to one of Geneseo's core values? Does it include opportunities to engage in structured reflection? And this was a big piece in terms of thinking about, are we going to have to drastically change some of the work that we're doing? And so a lot of times, like our undergraduate research programs there was reflection going on. I don't think it's the way faculty, they don't think about it that way. But really think about what would it take to put that piece into what we're already doing? And then there's is there an evaluation period? So Paul, you can go to the next slide. One of the other biggest hurdles we need to figure out was if this was going to be too much of a lift for our campus. And so we actually pulled from 2 data sets from some surveys happening on campus to determine if this was going to be doable. And so first one we pulled from a 2017 National Survey of Student Engagement, the NESE, showed that 87% of our seniors participated in some kind of high impact practice. So things like service learning, a learning community, research, internship, field experience, study abroad, or a capstone program. And then we had a later local survey in 2019 for a survey of all our graduating seniors that actually showed that over 99% of our graduating seniors participate in one of these 5 categories here. And so these are examples that we're talking about. And so we have really recent data that says that even without us trying very hard, our students are already doing this. It's already, it's talked about in such a way and demonstrated, our faculty are demonstrating a value in this, that students are just opting into participating in these. And so one of the things we realize is that adding this as a graduation requirement is not really an undue burden that we're putting on either faculty or students or any of the employees on campus, but it's actually, thinking about it, it's a way to really ensure equity in the experiences that are being offered. And so students are participating in things, but if they're not meeting all of these criteria, say they have this great experience, but they're not, the piece of reflecting isn't in there, are they really getting what we need them to get out of the learning experience? And so having this structure in place is really a way that in small ways, the offerings we already give to our students and our opportunities for our students can be a little bit more structured, and we know for sure that they're getting what we want to out of that experience. That is all I have.
Okay, and then
All right, so
go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to set you up, Paul, so go for it.
Oh, great. Okay. So several of us are now going to take you through the timeline from the first development of GLOBE and to its planned implementation, fingers crossed, starting in fall 2022. So the story begins in 2011 when 5 folks from Geneseo went to the Association of American Colleges and Universities, AAC&U Institute on General Education and Assessment, sent there by our then provost and GALA founding member, Carol Long, to start a conversation about our local curriculum, both in terms of its objectives and in terms of the barriers that it presented to transfer students within SUNY, which has had the system-wide general education requirements that several of us have spoken of since 1999. So the team that came back from that institute developed an approach that put revising Geneseo's Gen Ed requirements in the larger context of both, larger context of baccalaureate learning outcomes across both general education and the major, and an approach that draws from the AAC&U's LEAP initiative, LEAP standing for Liberal Education and America's Promise. And after a host of conversations with stakeholders in various formats, culminating in a 2-day summit in 2014, the team came up with a framework for a new Geneseo curriculum with the acronym that we've been talking about today, GLOBE, Geneseo Learning Outcomes for Baccalaureate Education. GLOBE as a framework was adopted by our College Senate in 2015, at least the first time around. It was revisited, I think, in 2016 and reaffirmed at that time. So I'm going to pass things off to David Levy to talk you through the next phase.
Thanks, Paul. So again, I'm David Levy. I'm an associate professor, chair of the philosophy department, and for the last 2 years, I've been the chair of the curricular design working group. I was initially a liaison to the group from the philosophy department when it was being headed up by Beth McCoy from the English department. So the curriculum design working group was established via charge given by both the president of the college, Denise Battles, and our campus-wide governance body, our college senate, in February of 2017. And as Joe mentioned during his initial remarks, it was tasked with proposing a new curricular structure in alignment with GLOBE that was to be implemented approximately 1 year later. During the first 2 years of SIDWIG's work, work was done to explore models at other campuses, investigate SUNY general education requirements and other kinds of constraints, and participate in additional professional development opportunities through AAC&U and elsewhere. Quickly on the issue of constraints, one thing that was identified along the way was the way in which a combination of financial aid awarding rules and practices had unfortunate implications for students who were significantly dependent upon financial aid. As we examined things like the possibility of introducing clusters or other kinds of thematically related groups of courses that would sort of toe the line between the general education program, students' majors, and then other kind of electives coursework. We ran really hard up against the recognition that a system like that could spit out rather inequitable and clearly unfortunate implications for students who have significant dependency upon both federal and state financial aid requirements. I'll say no more about that now, perhaps something that we can explore a bit more during the discussion period. But in the face of these kinds of constraints, the looming reality of pushes from SUNY to demand our good participants under the heading of systemness and this suggestion that changes at the level of SUNY's general education requirements would be coming. There was a time when we did very seriously consider simply throwing our hands up and saying, not now. We'll get back to this once SUNY gives us clear direction about what to do. The slide, by the way, here, you'll note both constraints and pause are hyperlinks. We're happy to share the slideshow with anybody who'd like after. You can read some of my predecessor, Beth McCoy's very, very eloquent and thoughtful blog posts about the realities of the financial aid reporting system and other kinds of constraints and the looming concerns about SUNY-wide changes. Through all that, we did decide to persevere, push on, but under a different structure. And so jumping to fall of 2019, we decided to take the entire membership of the working group and split it up into 3 subcommittees, each with a very specific focus. One group, the one headed up by Meg, worked on the development of the integrative and applied learning proposal. Another group, it's been headed up by Paul, works on changes to the campus curricular governance structures. And then the final group, which I took the leadership role in, began by completing an exercise we called curricular tagging. Before we considered specific models for what a revised curriculum could look like, we thought it was sensible to figure out where in the curriculum we're already making good on the promise to deliver GLOBE's skills to our students. And so a very compressed time frame by the end of the fall 2019 semester, somewhere in the neighborhood of 86% of all of the courses that were then listed in the undergraduate bulletin had been tagged. That is course by course. This was work done within individual academic units. Course by course, courses were identified as meeting, to what extent, in what ways, various aspects of the GLOBE's outcomes. In light of those, we ran analyses through spring and summer of 2020, which you might recognize as in the height of the pandemic. So we took advantage of the fact that we weren't meeting all that much to just run the numbers, right? And it turned out we were doing pretty well. We had lots of rich opportunities across the curriculum for students to be introduced to experiences to develop GLOBE's outcomes. And so with that, we had the confidence to kind of move forward and think about ways in which we could present the curriculum much more intentionally so that the skills were being added to the foreground as opposed to simple disciplinary methodology, disciplinary homes. By the end of fall of 2020, we had a draft for a proposal, period of open fora, online comment opportunities. Hundreds of our colleagues participated over the course of several months. The group got together again over the January winter break, revised the curriculum model, shared it out, again invited feedback. The group got together in light of all of that, proposed specific amendments, and finally the proposal was submitted to campus governance in the spring of 2021. What was submitted included the formal proposal to add the integrative and applied learning requirement as a graduation requirement. So that brings us up to this year and governance considerations. And for that, we'll pass it on to our current presiding officer, Amy Sheldon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy. Like David said, I am the faculty presiding officer and chair of our College Senate. And I'm also a faculty member in the geology department. When the proposal came to our College Senate, it had been fully vetted across campus. Literally, you couldn't be a faculty member on our campus and not have been invited to participate at multiple points already. So it was well vetted and it received an overwhelming 97% of the votes were in favor of it. So it passed really, really well and successfully, but that was in May. And now it's September and we're in the beginning of the fall semester and we have an implementation date of next fall. So currently we are preparing for a very rapid turnaround. We might be breaking records, at least for our institution. It's in a very aggressive timeline, but we all recognize that this is a really exciting moment in the campus, in the college's history, and the new curriculum is really in the best interest of all of our students. So I think as much as it's a lot of work for people, everyone's excited about doing it. What does the work look like? Right now, we are working on approving an interim process that will allow us to implement the curriculum while we simultaneously also address formal changes to our shared governance structure that Paul's group is working on so that our formal process will align with how our new curriculum is defined. Our interim process relies very heavily on an existing general education committee that is putting together a list of courses that would fit this new curriculum for the fall next year. And then the College Senate will approve those, and all of that's going to be done within the next couple of months. Simultaneously, Melanie and a crew from the Provost's office is working on the record keeping methods to determining whether we'll have sufficient number of courses and the learning experiences. And another group of representatives from offices that supervise the high impact practices are evaluating the availability of those learning experiences so that we can ensure that students will be able to fully meet all aspects of the new curriculum. And I said all of that very quickly because we said we would be 30 minutes. So we can move on then to the lessons we've learned. From my perspective, and I'll introduce this, and I think it's going to go back to Joe. Along the way, one of the things that we implemented when I became Senate chair, at least a couple of years ago, was a leadership team. And the leadership team consisted of everybody on this call and the provost, everybody on this team rather, and the provost's office. And we met every 2 weeks roughly to provide support to David and Meg and Paul throughout this entire process. And that open communication was paramount to this being a successful completion. There was a lot of listening to one another and supporting one another and having a pulse on the temperament and tempers, if you will, of various entities within the college at various moments, and having that frequent communication allowed us to be able to respond back up sometimes, or pause when we needed to pause, give the community more time when they wanted more time. But it allowed us to be able to respond in real time to what the community's needs were so that we could lead to a successful conclusion. So, Paul or Joe.
I'll just add, as we've been talking here and reliving this, as I've been involved with the GLOBE project since it started back in 2011. So I've spent a decade with this, as have some of the others here. Really navigating multiple layers of complexity throughout this process. Our own local identity, our previous general education program, which really was rooted in a particular set of expectations and experiences, being part of a SUNY system whose rules and expectations are often not entirely on the same page as our local campus priorities. As others have mentioned, issues with financial aid, navigating various changes in higher education. So in a lot of ways, I would reiterate what Amy said about the importance of collaboration. Really what made this project work, I think, was the fact that it was completely transparent. It moved at its own pace. And so although we were consistently sort of keeping our eye on the fact that we really need to get this to happen, we also did take the time to pause when we needed to, or bring others into the fold to talk through what are we doing, why are we doing it? And I think in a lot of ways it's reflective of a campus culture where that kind of working together, and particularly working across divisions, is something that we've really been growing into. So the ability to bring folks from financial aid into a conversation about the curriculum, or people from student and campus life into a conversation about what students are doing outside of the classroom, was really essential to, I think, what ended up being, I think, a really strong proposal. And I'll invite anybody else from the group to share any other lessons, and then we'll open things up to questions.
Well, I'll just say, we could have presented an even longer timeline that would go back at least as far as the mid 80s when I first arrived at Geneseo, and shortly after which there was already very lively conversation going on around one specific general education requirement we had, the humanities requirement. And a lot of the conversation focused on the need for a more globalized perspective on the curriculum. And one of the things that's remarkable to me, thinking about that longer timeline, is to think back to the way we communicated around these issues in the late 80s and the early 90s, typing up memos and sticking them in our colleagues' boxes in their office mailboxes. And a lot of that communication and conversation that Joe was just talking about, that David talked about, it's been enabled by electronic communications. And I think that's made a huge difference. It's been possible to have more inclusive conversations, bring more people into the conversation, ensure that people's concerns are heard and responded to, because we have multiple ways now to give people voices and to be responsive. And in the latter part of this process, starting from the creation of SIDWIG in 2016, 2017, everything's been documented in a wiki, including those blog posts that Beth McCoy wrote, that David referred to. So we captured a lot of institutional history there as well, and made it possible for ourselves to remind ourselves, track back, remind other people about what happened in the past, because over time, as we all know, people's memories about what happened in the past can differ, and that can be a source of disagreement. So it's really remarkable to me how the nature of the conversation and the process has changed over this longer timeline by the advent of electronic communications.
Right. Well, that's our story. And I think we can open it up to questions. If Paul, you'd like to stop sharing so we can see others in the room, we're happy to unpack any of this, answer any follow-up questions. I think, from our perspective, we thought that this would be useful for GALA in particular because of the participation in a global society components and our commitments to integrative and applied learning.
I just had to share that last slide, Joe, before I stopped sharing, because that was the last and in some ways perhaps most important lesson learned.